Hello, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, featuring today's top directors sharing behind-the-scenes stories of their latest films and insights into the craft of directing. Please take a second to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Alfonso Gomez-Rejon's new biographical drama, The Current War, Director's Cut. The film reveals how electricity titans Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse engaged in a battle of technology and ideas to determine whether direct current or alternating current would power the modern world. In addition to The Current War Director's Cut, Mr. Gomez-Rejon's credits include the feature films Me and Earl and the Dying Girl and The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the pilot for the series Red Band Society, and episodes of the television series American Horror Story, The Carrie Diaries, and Glee. Following a recent screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Mr. Gomez-Rejon spoke with director Jonathan Mostow about filming The Current War Director's Cut. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Okay, well, congratulations. It's a sprawling historical film with a lot of huge ideas and huge kind of towering characters. I think I'm going to start with kind of the most, start with the title, right? So it's The Current War, the Director's Cut. So this film, as I understand, has sort of had a road kind of to get here, and can you talk about that? Why?
Sure. It was. I may start crying halfway through the story, but it was a very long road to get here, and it feels great to be able to finally screen my version of it. It had a long history with the Weinstein Company, and then the company, of course, collapsed, and the film was in limbo for a bit. But and in that process of rushing it to a film festival, the Toronto Film Festival a few years ago, there were a lot of compromises with the film, and I wasn't happy with it, and we rushed it and exposed it and were reviewed, and it was a hard period to be. It's the power of one screening and social media, and that defines you and defines the work that wasn't yours. It wasn't a complete vision yet, and so after the company collapsed, it just kind of was shelved for a little bit until the studio found a new home, or the films that the studio had that were completed found a new home, and eventually it made its way a few months ago to 101, and we got it back and were able to recut the film, got the cast together to get again for a day of shooting in London, a handful of scenes that I always wanted that we had cut in pre-production, and they were all incredibly supportive of the movie, of me, and it came together quickly. New score, so many new elements, new scenes, new score. A great new, David Trachtenberg is here, who's one of the editors or the editor of the film, and it just found its shape. It hadn't found its shape yet. The scenes were still, we're still a work in progress when we screened, and to be defined by that was really hard. But so it feels great to finally be able to come here with this version. And the reason of the title is very simple. Rotten Tomatoes is a can make or break you, and we were defined by old reviews, and by having a new title that represented my vision, it also allowed us to start fresh with a new page, and hopefully, if the reviews are kind, hopefully they will be, at least I'm not being hurt by old reviews based on old versions of the film.
Got it. Well, hopefully starting fresh won't be a pun with that website. So, you mentioned that you went back to London, and hopefully we'll have time to go back to that, because as I understand, the whole film was shot in England, which is kind of fascinating for such an American story. This film is so different than your last film, right? So I'm curious, what drew you to this, and how did this come about in your life, this film?
Well, although someone just pointed out, and they were right, how similar they are. Thematically, it's an extension of the last. Certainly what Tesla says at the end about all we leave behind are our ideas is basically the end of me and Earl, and someone had to point it out to me, but I guess you're operating on some kind of subconscious level. You're you're telling the same stories or working through the same ideas that you had a few years ago, certainly when you started making the movie. And there's certainly a lot of celebrating creativity and invention in it that the last one did also, and motion pictures. Basically, it's the same film, but but this one is. But what I liked about it was I'd gone through a few. I almost made another movie after Me and Earl, and one of my agents asked me to look at this script one more time, because originally when I read it, I only saw the top layer of it, which is electricity and Edison and Westinghouse, and it wasn't my thing. But this whole idea of how far a man would go to be remembered, and this battle between ego and humility, were just ideas that I was now thinking about. And I liked exploring grief with Edison in him trying to defy nature constantly throughout, and his wife died, and he would then preserve her disembodied voice in a box, and then that didn't work, and it's her as a motion picture, and that didn't work, and then it's going to be a memory, which is motion picture at the end of Niagara Falls, and I understood him a little better and understood why he would go to the dark side without her, and I thought that was a journey I wanted to take. But it was really kind of examining these two sides of myself, I guess, of the ego and humility. And as a filmmaker, I guess you want to make films that will last. And as an inventor, it's about coming up with solutions that are permanent. And but then that is at odds with humility of Westinghouse not even wanting his name on anything or his photograph taken, and just the work to speak for itself. And it was just ideas that I was thinking about, that plus the responsibilities and the ethics around technology was something I had just started to think about. With the light bulb comes the electric chair, and it's evolved even in the making of the movie how technology and culture come hand in hand, and they evolve together, whether it's the light bulb or the birth control pill or the flushing toilet. But now things are moving so fast that I don't know if we're capable of adapting. Facebook didn't exist 15 years ago, and now it swayed an election. What's going to happen in 5 years? And it was just, I thought it was in addition to being able to create a rock and roll, not musical, kind of a musical biopic. I always saw it as a very musical film. And one of my first meetings with Harvey, it was all Pennebaker and Maisels and concert footage, and I was going to shoot it like a concert film. I wanted to make sure it was clear that it was not going to be the King's Speech or something very formal. I wanted it to be something that was in constant motion. So all that made it a very exciting thing for me, both as a filmmaker and as a person.
Edison is a controversial character, and depending on whose narrative you go, he's he's the villain of some stories, the hero of others. So how did you approach that, doing something historical like this, with a huge historical character like that hasn't been represented that much in films that at least I'm aware of? So can you talk about that process and that challenge?
Of Edison.
Of Edison, yeah, specifically.
Well, Edison's such a complicated character. I first have to start with Michael's script. He was able to create this from light bulb to electric chair, and that's the section of his life that we're going to explore. We did work on drafts that explored his second wife and the bigger house, and which made it into an 8-hour film. So we had to condense it and went back to his original structure, but explored Mary a little further and kept her alive in the movie long after she's physically dead. And it was always hard to collapse time and make it. I always wanted to make it. It was supposed to be a quick film, a fast film, and it had a certain tempo to it, so I couldn't cover everything. So we start collapsing characters. Two wives become one. Southwick Brown is a combination of Alfred Southwick and Harold Brown. I just took one name from the two men that inspired him and made one person. And so so I have to start with Michael's script that created that structure for me to then play with, and then how dark could we go with Edison, as long as we understood how he thought and what Mary, the power that Mary had over him, that she could reset him and center him. And without that, how dark he would go without someone like Marguerite Westinghouse, that was a true partner to Westinghouse. So it did, we did research, we read his diaries, and a lot of sometimes dialogue comes straight out of there, certainly the courtroom case as well, to get a sense of what he was going to be like. But it was more about capturing him and his relationship with the Westinghouse, and both as not necessarily counterpoints, but counterparts. So it was much more nuanced than the tidy, overweight, and the unkempt showman. I like the idea of Edison thinks AC is bad simply because it's not his idea. But I think in many ways I liked Edison as someone who created out of spontaneity. He created something impossible, and then a demand followed. All of a sudden, you needed the phonograph, and Westinghouse found a way to contextualize those inventions. And but I think Edison saw him as an improver, not an inventor. Yeah.
There's two moments that I particularly loved, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on. One is that line where he says to his I can't remember the character's name, the protege. He says, "You're just like me, but you're human,"
Mm-hmm.
And then the other is when he's explaining that thrill of getting the light bulb to work, and how it just starts, it's going, and it's going for 10 minutes, and it's going for 20 minutes. And that I thought really, I think that's a hard thing to do, is to capture sort of what is the emotional reality, what makes guys like that tick, what gives them their drive, and those two moments particularly, I just thought were really effective in that way. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, I think I have more to say about the last one than the first one. You're just like me, but a human being. I think it's Edison at his lowest, and maybe at his most vulnerable after being pushed out of his own company. But the last one is one of the most beautiful moments even to shoot, because it was the only scene I had. It was like making two movies, one with Benedict and then he left, and then Shannon came in, and then we shot his movie, and they only share two scenes: the courtroom scene, and they barely say a word to one another. As actors, they barely interacted. They just kind of kept their distance, which I love. That their process is always fun to watch. And for that last scene, it was just them as I liked. You could hold you can really, when editing that scene I could be working on that scene today, because you can hold the whole scene on Benedict and it sustains, and you do it on Shannon because they're doing such subtle, nuanced work. And Shannon is such a fan of Westinghouse, is such a fan of Edison. He always was, and he still is. And you see his eyes kind of sparkle as he's telling a story of something that he wasn't able to do. And that was just a beautiful, very human moment. And it just felt like, these two men in many ways are very similar. They were both tinkerers since birth. The railway, air brake, and the phonograph were developed concurrently. But and it makes you wonder what would have happened had he just put ambition and ego aside and had dinner at his house. So it's just it kind of equalizes them for a moment. And
you mentioned these two actors, which obviously is the next big thing to talk about. For both Benedict and Shannon, what were their issues coming into the film, and can you discuss the process of how you wound up selecting for the film and how you worked with them, and what issues came up?
No, I mean, I had an opportunity because Benedict was attached to the project when I came on, and he was. I was in London when he was in London and Shannon was on another film, we did get a chance to rehearse and challenge every line of the script and really find the voice, because originally I think there was an instinct that it wasn't wrong to come in and play Edison. Edison was mostly deaf, and the only recordings of him are when he's older, and so the references made made Edison sound too old, and I wanted the film to be about kind of these 40-year-olds changing the world and have a youthfulness to it. And so we decided to tone down the deaf, because occasionally you'll see a little lean. That's all it needed, just to kind of address it, a little nod. We get it, and then it's not about him. It's our interpretation of him, or having to speak really loud, because it ages someone immediately. So it was about making those choices and crafting this version of Edison that captured the spirit of him and of the time, as opposed to getting all the details right. And then I think he would have come off as like an 80-year-old man, because we heard some recordings of it, and we just can't do that, the radio voice. And for Shannon, very little rehearsal. We talked about it at a bar in Brooklyn. He came in late because his movie that he was on was over schedule. He'd gone over schedule. So we just had one rehearsal in his gigantic house that we use in the film, and shot the next day. And as soon as he just slipped into the clothes, it was magical. I mean, really, I think I just love actors so much, because I don't understand. I think there's that Mike Nichols line. Someone asked him, like, how do they do what they do? You'll never know. It's just it's a mystery to me. And to see Shannon, who's so quiet and introverted in so many ways, get fitted, and you walk into his trailer and you see him in his clothes. I remember when I walked in his trailer, he was getting fit for the first fit with and he was about to do his first scene, and the lamb chops were on, and he had a new voice, a new attitude, posture, everything changes. The clothes make you stand a certain way, and then he just got it. We just worked a little on a tempo and a rhythm, because my thing was that both men had to be in the same world in the same time, because I was intercutting two storylines, and they had to have the same kind of American contemporary rhythm to their voices. And Michael and Catherine were a great kind of rock and roll couple. And then I had Tuppence and Benedict, two Brits playing Americans, and they all had to feel like they were in the same movie.
And so you're shooting in England. I'm assuming you're one of the few Americans involved in the production, right?
We had a few of the producers were American. Michael Ryder was American. Everybody else was, because we shot in the UK primarily, well, for a number of reasons. The amazing crew, amazing. We had to recreate this world somewhere. It doesn't exist in Pittsburgh or New York, really. And as a part of the tax break, you hire from Europe, EU, UK. But that's how I got Jan Rolfs as a designer, who I knew, he has worked from the Peter Greenaway movies, The Cook, the Wife, a Thief, and Her Lover, and I love he's very bold in his choices, and that's what the movie needed. I guess so. Our editor was American, but most of the rest of the crew, from most of the heads of the department were from Europe, European.
And when I say it's very different than your last film, I mean, this is a historical epic, right? Your other film was a very contemporary, intimate, youth-oriented film. So in approaching something like this, which is like kind of a big thing to take on, what were your you mentioned already you wanted to keep it moving and all that, but what did you have? Did you go back and look at other historical films and go, well, I want to not repeat that, or here's something that really works for me? Or, I mean, how did you approach taking something historical and making it relevant to a contemporary audience?
Well, I didn't worry about the size of it. In fact, the bigger the better. I mean, I love filmmaking. I love getting lost in the world and creating a world that we could do. I mean, Chung, who shot the film, this is the third thing we do together. Our rule was there are no rules. And we just didn't want it to be an old-fashioned, formal portrait of a time that was all about innovation. It was about the future, not about the past. But ultimately, it comes down. I mean, ultimately, all the films are all intimate because it's you looking into an actor's eye, and the world is happening around you. But creating that world was, of course, I know it's very different from the last one. Nor do I want to just make small YA movies about cancer. I mean, creativity. I want to create. I want to discover things about myself, but also get lost in different worlds. And I thought this is a world that was, Social Network 1893. I thought that would be a very exciting world to get lost in and create and document in some way through my lens or our lenses.
Now, for people who don't know, you have a really interesting resume because you have worked for three pretty incredible and all three very different filmmakers. So I'm curious if you could talk about that a little bit, and was there anything that you learned from working for those directors that have informed your own directing career?
So the directors you're talking about, Scorsese, Nora Ephron, and Iñárritu, they've been huge figures and guardian angels in my life, and through them, other people that have become very close to me, like Thelma Schoonmaker and Nicholas Pileggi. And I feel, I don't know how I got a seat at the table, but it started with an obsession over Scorsese movies. And that led me to New York, and you learn a little from each. Ultimately, you can't learn how to make movies because you hopefully see things your own way. But I think they all, I think mainly humility, oddly enough, is the bigger they got, the more I learned. The Scorsese, you can't have a conversation with him without him talking about everyone that came before him, in film history and how little one knows. And so it does. What it did, it inspired me to keep learning about film history and always remind myself how little I do know about it. But I was very fortunate that they all. Nora Ephron got me into the Guild. She literally forced Paramount to get me into the Guild on one of her movies as a second unit director. As before that, I had been her assistant. So that generosity, and they saw something that I may not have seen about myself. That certainly gives you the confidence to keep at it.
And now Scorsese is an executive producer on this. So what was his involvement in the production?
I didn't answer your other question, but seeing movies, preparing for this, it was mainly photography, that early experimental color photography, David Bailey rock and roll photography. It was a lot of David Bowie for Tesla and Jagger and Dylan and Patti Smith and the young Stevie Nicks. It was the direction that my office was surrounded by images, so every department knew that it wasn't a movie where they were supposed to kind of replicate everything exactly, but it was kind of a bit of a direction, literally, of go this way and that way, and surprise me. But that was that answer. But the Scorsese really saved my movie because I have one of my agents or my team were very smart in that they included Scorsese in my deal before I made a movie with Harvey. That if it ever got bad and my final cut rights weren't upheld, that and we couldn't agree on a version of the movie that Scorsese would get final cut. And then the studio collapsed, and that was that. And then we all read in the trades a year or two later. This journey has been incredibly surreal, but we all read in the trades that the movie was going to be distributed, released internationally, and we just all called each other. And of course, my question was which version and who and what cut, and we were able to stop that process because Scorsese had technically never gotten his final cut. And as soon as Scorsese got the final cut, he handed it to me and allowed me to finish the film as I imagined. So
the whole, the big New Yorker piece and all that dropped at what point when you were in the process?
2 months before our release. It was at the height of, we were literally cutting post TIFF in the offices when it broke. was a very surreal time.
Yeah, I can only imagine. What do you think? I mean, you've obviously thought about this a lot because of the film. What's your take on sort of when you look at, I don't know, Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or the people that I guess are sort of the modern day equivalents of this? What is thinking about these characters? Is it giving you insight into these guys? Do you think you understand them in a different way than the rest of us do?
No, I don't think I understand them better than anyone else. It was fun to get into their heads for a little bit, in inventors' heads, but what is interesting is I don't think anyone creates something. I don't think Edison created the light bulb knowing that the electric chair would follow, and that's a mystery when it gets into the wrong hands and when it kind of it starts to move faster than we can adapt to it. I mean, I keep reading about our consciousness being uploaded to the cloud in 3 years, and and it's all possible. And I think the responsibility that comes with inventions is something that must cross their minds.
Mm-hmm. What for you is like some of the favorite moments for you in making the film?
Oh God, I love making films. Every moment on set, there's no other place I'd rather be. We had a wonderful time making this film. Post was a different story, but actually physically making the film, I was just surrounded by a lot of just equally crazy artists, and Chung Chung has been a brother to me, and because we plan the movie so carefully in pre-production, storyboard it carefully, and then let it go. It's very freeing knowing that you have a partner who gets what you're trying to do and how you're trying to tell the story, and it lets you relax and focus on the actors. But it was an absolute joy just working with these fine actors. That's the biggest. That brings me great joy. The technical and the visual is always. It's how I started, how I got into it. Before I saw Mean Streets and realized movies could be personal, and that really changed me. I was fascinated by the craft. So that has always been a part of why I enjoy making films, the actual making of it. But any moment with an actor, when you see them deliver a line or a note or give them a note in the way they express it, it's just a mysterious process, and I can't think of one right off the bat.
Well, sort of go back, something I was asking before about the difference of shooting in England versus here. The first movie was mostly young cast, all American actors, and here you're doing mostly British cast. What are the differences for you in just sort of how those actors approach the work? It doesn't necessarily even have to be the actual process of shooting the film. It could be how they, just the whole vibe of it, how they come to the set, how they communicate with you.
I noticed it. It didn't seem that different from all the actors. Every process is different. So you try to just create a space that is safe and creative for them. I did notice we cast a lot of the small roles, and there were a lot of supporting roles out of the theater in London. I love theater, and so it was a great joy to go to the theater, find someone you like, and then they come and audition. And they're just so well trained in England. Some of the greatest acting schools are there, so they come so prepared, and they know the text so well. And they're so respectful, and but it was the joy of all the little characters, and they could be in a gigantic play in the West End, and they come and come in for one line, and they do it as if it's the lead role with such humility. I'd never had that experience because I'd never worked with such a sprawling cast. But other than that, it's just about what's right for them.
One of the things I admired at having shot in England is a lot of actors can technically do an American accent, but sometimes it just sort of abridges their acting. Part of the brain is just thinking about the accent, perhaps, and they're just not as good as they are in their natural accent.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel this here. Everybody felt like fully realized in their performance.
Yeah, Benedict and I worked a lot on that, and we had a great dialect coach as well. And he loved being corrected if his dialect coach didn't catch something. And then, of course, we would tweak things occasionally because I was obsessed with him being absolutely perfect American. And the smaller roles, I was okay with letting an accent come and go. Sometimes the American, sometimes it sounded too American, like a fake American. But it was okay if Cochran, his Westinghouse's attorney, who was Irish and had been in New York for 15 years, he would have a little bit of an Irish accent. He was Irish, so we just let it go. And so occasionally it was okay to have other accents kind of living among them and not so flat American. But it was important for me that at least the four leads had a more contemporary rhythm to them.
Got it. All right, well, I'm getting the time's up thing, so thank you, congratulations on this film, and thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more, you can find past episodes of The Director's Cut wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay tuned in the coming weeks for more great Q&As with directors Martin Scorsese and Robert Eggers. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow cinephiles find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.